Hey everybody, Jim here with another video for you. This is 50 years in film, 2020 and 2021, the pandemic years. But before we begin, at the end of this video, if you do like this content, please consider giving me a thumbs up, a possible subscribe, but most importantly, please leave comments below, especially on this video. I really want to know what, as bad as and painful as it might be, I want to hear your stories about what was going on with your family and with yourself during these years. Now, we're going to change the rules. We already did just with the introduction. Normally, I do these videos 1 year at a time. But 2020 and 2021, of course, were the years of the pandemic, COVID-19, the coronavirus, whatever you want to call it. At the end of the day, regardless of how I felt during that time, or how it was an inconvenience to see some things that I truly love change forever, at the end of the day, it's all nothing, because as of April 13th, 2024, the World Health Organization has attributed to over 7 million people globally who died directly from the coronavirus. And that is not including any secondary causes. When you look at it from those terms, regardless of what your politics are, and I am not a political person, you will never hear me discuss politics on this show or on this channel. Regardless of what your politics on the matter are, it's a global tragedy that unfortunately may have been avoided had things been different. So, bearing all that in mind, we are doing things completely different for this particular video. We're going to start off with what was going on with me in 2020. 2020 was a really shitty year even before the lockdown started. It started on January 7th of that year, when probably the most influential person in my life, outside of my parents and close friends, Peart, passed away for cancer. It was a complete shock to us Rush fans, and the reason why I say he was so influential to me, as I've mentioned in other videos, I was a drummer throughout school and as an adult, and he was definitely the most influential drummer I ever listened to. But more importantly, he was also the chief lyricist from that band, and he was an author in his own right. He wrote 5 or 6 books, usually nonfiction, although he did write a fiction book before he passed away, Clockwork Angels. This man, in addition to being an incredible drummer and an incredible lyricist, was a true Renaissance man. He had so many different interests, and he faced his own personal tragedy when, out of nowhere, his daughter tragically died in a car accident, and 6 months later, his wife died of cancer. When that happened, he broke up with his 2 bandmates, said he was considered retired, jumped on a motorcycle, and spent the next 2.5 years literally riding around the world on a motorcycle, trying to come back from his own personal hell. It's documented in a book called Ghost Rider. It's an incredible, incredible book. But he did come back, and they put out a couple more albums before it was all said and done. Before it was over, he remarried and had another child, and told his 2 bandmates, "Consider me retired again. I want to spend the rest of my life with my family." And they begrudgingly agreed, because the man deserved it. Less than 5 years later, he died. That broke me, and it still breaks me, because again, he was such an important figure in my life. So that's how 2020 started for me. And around that time, I started reading stories about this mysterious illness coming out of Asia called the coronavirus. But let's get to the movies. We are going to jump around. We are definitely going to jump around in genre in this video. But instead of our normal pattern, because we are doing 2 years, I'm gonna be showing these movies chronologically up until the last film. So in 2020, I've only got 6 titles. The first of which was Birds of Prey, or The Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, directed by Kathy Yan, and starring Margot Robbie, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Rosie Perez, and Ewan McGregor. This is a standalone story for Harley Quinn, the character that Margot Robbie introduced in the Suicide Squad movie. She was the best thing about that movie. And this movie is miles ahead of better than this version of Suicide Squad. This is not a great movie, but it is a lot of fun. And then we got The Invisible Man, written and directed by Leigh Whannell, and starring Elizabeth Moss in an absolutely incredible performance. She is fantastic in this film. This is a modern day telling of The Invisible Man, of course. The earlier attempts to reboot the Universal Monsters failed miserably with Tom Cruise's The Mummy and to a lesser degree Benicio del Toro's The Wolfman. So they gave Leigh Whannell a shot with The Invisible Man. It was a low budget movie, but he had a different take on it than the actual original version, and this version's great. I think this might be my favorite version of The Invisible Man. Outside of the original, I guess the original one with Claude Rains is an untouchable classic, but this is miles ahead of Hollow Man and just about everything else in that genre sense. This is a great film. It really is. And that brought us up to April. No, I was right the first time. It was March 13th to be exact, when this movie was released, The Hunt, starring Betty Gilpin, Hilary Swank, and Ike Barinholtz, directed by Craig Zobel. This movie was actually supposed to come out the previous fall, but there was some mass shootings that were going on, and they decided to hold it off. And also, President Trump at the time had heard bogus information about how it was a movie about how liberals were hunting conservatives, and thought that the conservatives were going to be made out to be the bad guys. And believe it or not, the conservatives are actually the heroes of this movie. This movie had double bad luck, because not only was it postponed from that fall, it was released, like I said, theatrically. Along the other movie that was released that week was Bloodshot with Vin Diesel. The theaters closed down 5 days later. And they remained closed off and on for the next 6 months at least. And then movies did start to trickle out, but it was limited release, or if a theater was open, people were quite honestly afraid to go see a movie at a theater. Streaming was definitely taking over at this time. And this is where I first jumped on to YouTube. Because again, as I said earlier, Neil Peart died. I was still grieving about that. And I started looking at reaction videos and tribute videos to Rush and to him in particular. That made the time go by. And then I started watching movie reaction channels. And then movie collector channels, and eventually other channels similar to the one that I am running. We'll go further into that story as we go, but I just wanted to give you about an idea of what was going on with me at that point. Now again, we only have 3 more movies coming from 2020, and they all got limited releases. The first one, Bill and Ted Face the Music, which was the 3rd installment following up Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Again, starring Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter. This one is directed by Dean Or so, I guess. I don't know. Out of the three, this one is definitely my least favorite. However, I don't hate this movie because, again, I love the characters Bill and Ted, and I was so happy just to see these two back together again. Again, not a great movie at all, but it is fun. Then we got Wonder Woman 84. Now, this movie was part of Warner Brothers, of course. And at this point, they had just relaunched their streaming service from HBO Max to just Max. And at that point, the Warner Brothers chiefs decided that he was going to put their entire slate of theatrical films for the next 12 months on Max, starting with this film. Let's just say Hollywood freaked out. A lot of people say that the reason why the theatrical grosses on this movie were severely lacking because of that strategy. I disagree. This movie's a piece of shit. Directed by Patty Jenkins, starring Gal Gadot, Kristen Wiig, Pedro Pascal. This movie was so disappointing. The first Wonder Woman was such a pleasant surprise. It was so much fun. This movie's garbage. And the last movie from 2020 was Tenet. Now, up until this point, outside of the first film that Christopher Nolan did, Memento, all of his films were from Warner Brothers. And Tenet was included in that list of films that were supposed to be released. Christopher Nolan was one of those filmmakers that freaked right the hell out and insisted that this movie would get a theatrical release only, as was his contract, and was so upset with the decision by Warner Brothers to stream everything that he left Warner Brothers after this. Oppenheimer, which finally won him his Oscar and has become his most successful film globally, outside of The Dark Knight, wasn't produced by Warner Brothers. This is a really good movie. Like I said, it's directed by Christopher Nolan. It stars John David Washington and what's his face from Patterson. It's a good movie. It's weird as hell. It's got some great special effects. And that is it for 2020. Now, while all this stuff was going on with the internet, a lot of the fanboys on the internet were jumping up and down and screaming about talking to Zack Snyder, because there was rumors for years that Zack Snyder had a totally different version of Justice League. And Warner Brothers screwed him because his daughter died. That's why he had to leave the original. And Josh Whedon took over and rewrote the script, and apparently the entire cast was unhappy about it, but they were contractually involved, so they couldn't say anything at the time. And everybody remembers Justice League was a huge flop. Now, as I said earlier, HBO or Warner Brothers was really pushing hard for Max, and they were trying to get as much contact as possible. So in 2021, well, actually in 2020, but it came out in 2021 on Max, they released Zack Snyder's Justice League. And this movie is completely different than the theatrical version. It couldn't be any more different, I'm sorry. Directed by Zack Snyder, like I said, and starring Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill. You can see the names there. This is a 4-hour-long movie, Jack. I still don't think this is a great movie, but it is 100 miles better than the original version that was released in theaters. Zack Snyder, quite honestly, did get a raw deal, and he should have gotten a chance to fulfill his vision. They could have broken this up into 2 parts in the theaters, and I'm sure it would have been a huge hit. Then Warner Brothers released this one at the theater, but again, on Max at the same time. That's where I saw it. Godzilla vs. Kong. Directed by Adam Wingard and starring Kyle Chandler, Alexander Skarsgård, Millie Bobby Brown, and Rebecca Hall. This movie's a lot of fun. It's dumb as hell, but it's a lot of fun. And the new one I did see theatrically. I did a review on that months ago. I have not picked up the physical copy yet. I will. And when I get that one, I am going to do a Monsterverse rating. But again, check your brain at the door. This movie's a lot of fun. Kind of like with this one. Mortal Kombat. Again, released on Max and theaters at the same time. And again, I saw this one on Max too. This one's directed by Simon McLeod, and it stars a bunch of people, but the two that I really want to, and I got to look at the names, I'm sorry. Joe Taslim is Sub-Zero, and Hiroyuki Sanada as Scorpion. Sanada was in the Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, and Joe Taslim was in The Raid, and I love both of them. And this movie's a lot of fun. I know a lot of people don't like this movie because Johnny Cage ain't in it, and they don't actually have a tournament, and this and that and the other. I could care less. You know what? I loved the original one when I saw it originally, back in the 90s, okay? But I was pissed off because it was PG-13, and the one thing about these games that sold, it was the reason why everybody played them, was for the violence and the fatalities. This movie has plenty of both, and the fatalities are fun, over the top, gory. I love this movie. And if you would have told me that my favorite character was going to be Kano, I never would have believed you. Dumb movie, entertaining as hell. This one did get a theatrical release. Spiral from the Book of Saw, starring Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson, directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who directed Saw 2 and I believe Saw 3 as well. Saw was basically dead after Jigsaw. It was just dead. And apparently right before the pandemic, Chris Rock reached out to the movie studio and said that he had an idea for a Saw movie. And they immediately jumped at the chance to work with Chris Rock. And when I heard that Chris Rock was going to be in a Saw movie, I got to admit, I was intrigued, but I wasn't intrigued enough to go see it. This movie's not that great. It's a typical Saw movie with better production value and better acting. Then we've got A Quiet Place Part 2, starring Emily Blunt and Cillian Murphy, written and directed again by John Krasinski, and also Djimon Hounsou is also in this. I forgot to mention him. Great movie. I prefer the first one, but this is a really good movie. That one played theatrically and then came out on Paramount Plus 30 days later. Next we have The Forever Purge, the fifth installment in the Purge saga, directed by, because it wasn't Domenico, Everardo Valerio Gout, and starring Will Patton and Josh Lucas, among others. Good movie. Not my favorite in the series. Definitely not my least favorite, but decent movie. Okay, now we're back to the superhero guys. Sorry, Ball. I know you're tired of superheroes, and trust me, buddy, so am I. We have Black Widow. Again, this movie played theatrically, but they were going to put it out on Disney Plus within a 30-day window. Originally, it was supposed to be time or day and date. And then they changed it to you could go see it the day it came out at the theater, or you could digitally rent it. And then they announced that it would be on Disney Plus within 30 days. And let's just say that caused a lot of shit. Starring Scarlett Johansson, Florence Pugh, David Harbour, and William Hurt. Directed by Kate Shortland. This movie is not great. It's not terrible. It's just okay. But I do really like David Harbour in this movie. I think he's great. Then we have The Suicide Squad. written and directed by James Gunn, and starring Margot Robbie and Joel Kinnaman and Jai Courtney from the original Suicide Squad movie, as well as Viola Davis. But then adding to the mix on this one, you got John Cena, Idris Elba, and Sylvester Stallone as King Shark. This movie shouldn't exist. James Gunn was supposed to do Guardians of the Galaxy 3 at this point. And then some old tweets of his, some old bad jokes of his, re-arrived on the internet, and during the cancel culture, they freaked the hell out, and Disney basically fired him. And the entire cast of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies were up in arms and said that they weren't, even if they got sued, they weren't going to make a Guardians movie without him. And when DC found out about this, they did a really smart thing. They said, hey, James, Disney doesn't want you. We do. We'll let you make any DC movie you want. And he picked Suicide Squad because he said that he had so many different unknown characters from that universe that he wanted to introduce. But he wanted to make it rated R, and he wanted it to have a hard edge to it, along with, of course, his humor. They said, yes, he made this movie. This movie deserved much better than it got. I love this movie. I think it is absolutely hysterical. The biggest surprise to me on this movie is John Cena as Peacemaker. His character is unbelievably funny in this movie, and he got a spin-off series, which is just as good as this movie. Again, I love this movie. Then you've got ShangChi, The Legend of the Ten Rings, starring Simu Liu, Awkwafina, Michelle Yeoh, and Tony Young. This one is directed by, I have no clue, Dustin Daniel Cretton. Okay, whatever. Fun movie. But forgettable, quite honestly. I kind of forgot about this movie about 20 minutes after I watched it. But it was fun. Then we've got Cop Shop, starring Gerard Butler, Frank Grillo, and what is her name? I'm sorry. Alexis Louder. Written and directed by Joe Carnahan. This is a throwback to like those old grindhouse action movies of the 70s. Great movie. I love this movie. It's a lot of fun. Then we're back to another superhero movie, kind of. Venom, Let There Be Carnage. The second Venom movie. This one was directed by Andy Serkis, of all people. And it stars Tom Hardy and Michelle Williams again, as they reprise their roles from the first film. But adding to the mix is Woody Harrelson. Again, I'm not a huge fan of either of these movies. I got these movies for my grandson, but they are entertaining. And quite honestly, the third Venom movie that I saw the trailer for the other day does actually look kind of fun. So I'm kind of looking forward to that one. I'm not going to go see it theatrically, of course. I didn't see either of these theatrically. But I'll give it a shot. Then we've got Halloween Kills. This one was released theatrically, day and date, with Peacock, which is Universal's streaming service. Starring Jamie Lee Curtis and Anthony Michael Hall and Judy Greer, and again, directed by David Gordon Green. I got mixed feelings about this movie. I love the brutality factor of it, okay? This movie reminds me of like those old nasty slasher movies from the 80s. But the whole evil dies tonight chant got old the first time I heard it, much less the 500th time I heard it by the end of this friggin' movie. For that reason, I was hugely disappointed. But again, as far as the carnage factor goes, this movie delivers. Then we've got probably the best movie in the bunch. This is my Dune 2 film collection, the original Dune. Starring Denis Villeneuve, or directed by Denis Villeneuve, I'm sorry, starring Timothy Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Stellan Skarsgård, Zendaya shows up at the very end, but dude's great. I got a soft spot in my heart for the David Lynch version from the 80s. It was playing theatrically when I was working there, and I thought it was just a batshit crazy movie, but I understood that, they were trying to cram literally thousands of pages of text into a 2-hour movie, which is impossible. Denis Villeneuve, of course, got the opportunity to do it correctly, break it up into a couple of different movies, and yeah, he did it extremely well. Sorry, guys, we're back to the superheroes again, because again, we're going chronologically. Eternals, with a very eclectic cast of characters highlighted by Salma Hayek and Angelina Jolie, and directed by what the hell is her name? Jesus Christ, I'm bad. Chloe Zhao, I'm sorry, who won the Oscar the year before for No Man Land, I think it's called. I don't know, I've never seen it. Weak movie. It's got moments. Altogether, it's weak. But this one's not. Spider-Man, No Way Home. Starring Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, and Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, along with Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange. This movie's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, it also opened up the whole multiverse angle for the MCU, and the MCU has been off the rails ever since. But this movie played mainly to the fanboys, who would argue on the internet about who their favorite Spider-Man was, Tobey Maguire, and some like Garfield, and some like Tom Holland, and I know Stuart George over at Stuart George's Home Movies prefers Nicholas Hammond from the TV show. See, I remember that, Stuart. But no, this is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Got 2 left. The next one, Last Night in Soho, written and directed by Edgar Wright, and starring Anya Taylor-Joy and Matt Smith. Haven't seen it yet. This is one of 2 movies from Edgar Wright I have not watched yet. This one and Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I do need to watch both of them, and then I'm going to do an Edgar Wright ranking. But if this movie is like any of the other ones, it'll be great. We're ending it on this one. And this was not the last movie released that year, but it was one of them. This came out in, I believe, October of that year. No Time to Die. Starring Daniel Craig, Léa Seydoux, and what the hell is his name now? Jesus Christ, I am really losing it. Rami Malek. Jesus Christ, how can I forget? I'm sorry. Pardon my language. Directed by Cary Fukunaga. I saved this one to last because, spoiler alert, this is the last James Bond movie to date, and it's the end of the era for Daniel Craig because his version of James Bond dies at the end of this film. And at the end of this film, I realized that the Daniel Craig movies basically stand on their own from the rest of the series. They're basically their own series within the series. There's a storyline starting with Casino Royale. It runs through Quantum of Solace and Skyfall and Spectre, and concludes with this film, No Time to Die. Now, I don't like all 5 of those films. I've made it quite known how much I despise Quantum of Solace, and I definitely don't like Spectre that much either. But I really admire Skyfall. Casino Royale is my favorite Bond film of all time, and this one is great. It had an emotional punch I was not expecting. And again, outside of Casino Royale, I think this is his best performance as James Bond. This is a really good movie, and it's a great way to end that era of James Bond. And it's also a great way to end this horrible 2 years for the world, and to a lesser degree, for film. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it wasn't too much of a downer, and I hope I didn't babble on too much. But again, I was trying to come up with a way to do this and give it the respect that it deserved globally, but at the same time still make it kind of fun. So hopefully I succeeded in at least one of those areas. But until the next time, guys, I hope everyone is doing well, and we'll see you on the next one.